Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. On Sunday, Poles will choose their next president. Who will shape the nation's politics for the next 5 years? We'll have more on that in just a moment, but first, let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Russia says it wants to continue Istanbul peace talks. Europe remains silent about the latest US tariffs turmoil. And Canada wants to take part in the EU's Rearm Europe program. The Polish presidential campaign is coming to an end. In 3 days, Poles will choose between centrist Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski and right-wing Eurosceptic historian Karol Nawrocki. Both candidates are neck and neck ahead of Sunday's vote. Kazimierz Łysiak reports.
It is the final countdown before Poles cast their votes in the runoff presidential election on Sunday. Their choices: pro-EU Warsaw Mayor Rafał Trzaskowski or Eurosceptic historian Karol Nawrocki. The former comes from the ruling coalition led by Prime Minister Donald Tusk. The latter is backed by the right-wing opposition party Law and Justice. Both candidates are neck and neck in opinion polls, and this election will be crucial for the future of Poland.
I know what the stakes are. I'm not exactly calm, but that's because I knew from the very beginning the race would be extremely tight.
As the opposition, Law and Justice are doing their hardest to present this vote as a test for the current government, which has taken over in 2023.
This election will be a referendum on whether to reject the government of Donald Tusk.
If right-wing Nawrocki wins, the ruling centre Liberal camp would meet a major roadblock in the legislative process, as every new bill requires the president's signature.
Then that will make it very, very difficult for the government during the remainder of its parliamentary term, which is set to run till autumn 2027, and could set off a dynamic that could possibly even lead to the collapse of the government or possibly even lead to early elections.
That's the theory, but other analysts are not convinced that Nawrocki's victory would necessarily lead to a change of government.
It is not enough. It is not the main reason that can cause that the coalition collapse.
After all, the current government is already locked in an uncomfortable cohabitation with incumbent President Andrzej Duda, who hails from the Law and Justice Party. And while he's already vetoed several crucial bills, the ruling coalition could theoretically use his political allegiance as the reason behind not introducing other reforms.
It can be in some way positive for Donald Tusk and his government, because, as you said, it is easy to show that they are ready, for example, to change, to improve the political system. But of course, as Andrzej Duda did, now the President Nawrocki is also blocking what they would like to change.
But Rafał Trzaskowski has no intention of losing. He's had his eyes on the main prize since the moment he was announced as the Civic Coalition's candidate.
With such an energy, we will win the elections, for sure.
And his party colleagues are eager to have a president willing to cooperate. Their top priority will be fixing the judiciary after top Polish courts effectively lost their independence during the term of the Law and Justice Party.
We have planned some reforms which we're not able to implement under this president, Mr. Duda. Now we can go forward with our justice reform, rule of law.
But this election is not only about Poland's domestic policies. Pro-EU Rafał Trzaskowski would ensure the country would keep good relations with the European Commission. He is also supportive of Ukraine joining NATO in the future. His opponent is much more Eurosceptic and has been trying to mimic the style of US President Donald Trump. He's also received endorsements from pro-Russian European politicians like Romanian nationalist George Simeon and most recently Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. On June 1st, polls will decide which of these two will become president, but also where Poland will be heading on the international stage. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
Russia has proposed continuing direct peace talks with Ukraine, offering to meet for a second time in Istanbul at the beginning of June. The first meeting between the warring sides resulted in a prisoner swap, but offered no clear path to peace. Despite President Zelenskyy traveling to Turkey to meet with Vladimir Putin, the Russian leader was a no-show. And our correspondent, Alex Kadir, was in Istanbul for that first meeting and joins me now in the studio. Good evening, Alex. So could you tell us a little about this first round of negotiations in Istanbul? And is there even a tiniest change that the second round will bring a breakthrough?
Well, good evening. It was an almighty diplomatic dance. We were there waiting for days. President Zelenskyy said he would travel, as you said, and he would be willing to meet with Vladimir Putin. That stage set, that city between Asia and Europe, between those two continents, possibly bringing those two leaders together. That Ukrainian leader taking a step towards peace and traveling to Turkey, as we said, hoping that Vladimir Putin would join him. Vladimir Putin did not take a step out of Moscow, as we now know. There was hope. Perhaps they could reach some kind of peace agreement, make progress at least towards the peace that Ukraine wants, that Russia says it wants, and that Donald Trump, of course, has pushed for repeatedly. Vladimir Putin, you just said it, a no-show. He sent a junior delegation instead. Still a meeting happened between Ukrainian ministers and that junior delegation. They agreed three things. The prisoner swap that you just mentioned. They agreed that they would meet again. And they agreed that they would share their positions, their negotiating positions, to work towards a deal before that meeting happened. That is now the real sticking point. We've heard from the Ukrainian side that Russia has not shared its position. Ukraine says it has. That's the sticking point. We actually heard from President Zelenskyy, who was in Berlin with the German Chancellor in the last couple of days, and he made this very point. Let's have a listen to what he had to say.
Then they said there will be an agenda or memorandum or some other idea they will come up with that we could see right after the prisoner exchange. We did not get anything after the exchange either. Our side contacted the Russians. Our defense minister called the Russian negotiator Medinsky. They said there would be something, but we did not get anything. No one got anything. We asked the United States. They are waiting too. Everyone is waiting.
So President Zelenskyy is clearly indicating that Russia is dragging its feet, isn't he?
Yeah, a real frustration from the Ukrainian side. That's what officials from Kyiv have been saying behind the scenes, that they think this is a delaying tactic. Ukraine says it has shared its negotiating position with Russia, but received nothing back. Now, the Kremlin says they haven't received anything from Ukraine, and they've shared their position with the United States. So a bit of a muddled pre-negotiation, pre-talk negotiation. Ukrainian officials, and our viewers can make their own mind on this, but Ukrainian officials are very clear. They feel like this is Russia dragging their feet, saying they want peace, setting up a meeting, but they say they don't want to have a meeting just for a meeting's sake. They want to be able to make progress in those negotiations. Now, Russia says they are ready to share their position, their negotiating position with Ukraine. The response from Kyiv is, then share it. We're ready to receive it. Now, I asked Jorge Tiki, who's the Ukrainian Foreign Ministry spokesperson, will you send a delegation even if you don't have that Russian position? He repeated, we are ready to receive it. So at the moment, clearly, Ukraine not making that decision yet, because many analysts will say Ukraine can't really afford not to go, for the fear that the United States then says, well, Ukraine didn't engage in these peace talks, but they also want to avoid a situation, or was this what the spokesperson said, where the Ukrainian delegation goes and Russia suddenly reveals completely unacceptable demands. We know that in the last talks, they said they wanted Ukrainian troops to be withdrawn from Ukrainian territory. In the last few days, the position of Russia, no eastward NATO expansion, all of these factors playing in. And of course, Russia says it wants peace, but in the last few days we have seen attacks on civilians, on civilian infrastructure. The war rages on. Russia's invasion, of course, still taking lives despite that so-called or that alleged commitment to peace. So if Russia does want peace, it seems to be taking a very long road to it.
Alex, thank you very much for this analysis. Alex Kadir, our international correspondent. It was great to have you with us in the studio. European leaders have remained remarkably quiet regarding an American court ruling that struck down the sizable tariffs imposed by the US President Donald Trump. Slapped 20% import duties on European goods last month, but this court decision intends to wipe the slate clean. More on the transatlantic trade twist from our EU correspondent Angela Skujins in Brussels.
Silence. This is what we heard ripple throughout Europe after a US court handed down a shocking ruling that rendered US President Donald Trump's sweeping unilateral tariffs illegal. Now, while this is ostensibly good news for the EU, as those 20% tariffs have essentially been knocked back and will be nullified in 10 days, we heard a very muted response from European leaders. Now, while Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney celebrated the news, we heard the likes of European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Antonio Costa delivering very muted responses and speaking respectively about the danger of tariffs and how they want to seek a good deal with their counterparts in Washington. Let's take a listen to what they had to say instead.
We cannot allow ourselves to be thrown off course by the seismic changes that we are facing, or once again fall for the fallacy that the storm will pass, that things will go back to how they were before. If only the war would end, or a tariff deal be struck, or the next elections have a different outcome. No, they will not, because the geopolitical cross-currents are strong.
Together, we can be a force of trust in a global system where rules matter and our common values are preserved. We believe in the integration of international trade without tariffs that only create inflation and increase the difficulties of the companies.
Now, many see the lack of commentary as just smart politics, as no one wants to kick a man or the 47th President of the United States down, or they bear facing the consequences. But TVP World spoke to London economist Ian Beggs about the consequences of this news, particularly in Central Europe and Poland, as that country will still be targeted by those 25% sectoral tariffs, particularly talking about car parts and cars, steel and aluminium.
There could be further court cases. For example, if you are the importer of Polish parts in the United States, you may say, fine, the court has ruled in favor of stopping the tariffs under that particular legal instrument. We are going to pursue a similar case in relation to the one covering the 25% tariff on aluminium and steel. So it's very much up in the air.
And while this legal ruling is ostensibly good news for the EU, it is just another chapter in this turbulent trade war, which started when US President Donald Trump took office earlier in the year. But we are hoping for some more formal commentary, particularly from the EU executive, as their Commissioner for Trade, Maros Sefcovic, is in the throes of back-to-back conversations with his counterparts in Washington. Is he expected to meet with them face-to-face in July in Paris? And while we wait for some more firm words coming out of the Berlaymont, what is clear is that legal rulings and money talks. Angela Skujins from Brussels for TVP World.
Canada is seeking to join the Rearm Europe program, the EU's defence funding mechanism amounting to 800 billion euros. The move seems to be driven by the need to diversify Ottawa's partnerships and lessen its turbulent dependence on Washington. Zuzanna Jurek has more.
What to do when a friend might turn foe? This question is seemingly driving Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney to push for an EU defence partnership.
First of all, for Canada, this is a good solution to have the bypass for European technologies for strengthening their defense, and also participation in this European rearming initiative might be very important for Canadian producers.
The Rearm plan, introduced in March of this year, aims to expedite defense spending across the European continent and beyond in the period between 2025 to 2030. The funds available within the framework amount to 800 billion euros in extra expenditure. That will also include the recently ratified Security Action for Europe or SAFE mechanism, low-interest loans totaling 150 billion euros to strengthen the military-industrial base. And according to experts, the scope of the potential beneficiaries could prove vital for Canada's defense aspirations.
Canada urgently needs to diversify its defense partnerships to achieve a measure of independence from the US, and the technologically advanced EU, as well as the UK, with which it shares a king, is an obvious place to start.
According to the Canadian Prime Minister, there's a flurry of key capabilities which Ottawa could strengthen.
We will build a stronger Canadian Armed Forces to defend every inch of our territory through unprecedented investments in land, air, sea, and cyberspace.
Previously, Canada sought to participate in the Trump administration's aerial defense project, the Golden Dome.
We have an ability, if we so choose, to complete the Golden Dome with investments and partnership. And it's something that we are looking at. And something that has been discussed at a high level, but not sure one negotiates on this. These are military decisions.
The project, for which an initial sum of $25 billion has been earmarked, was announced just days after Trump's return to the White House in January.
Once fully constructed, the Golden Dome will be capable of intercepting missiles, even if they are launched from other sides of the world, and even if they are launched from space.
Now, however, it's not just the escalation of tensions with its neighbor, including a pending trade war which is driving the diversification. According to experts, Canada may also be seeking to strengthen its position within the NATO alliance.
Great player when we think about the NATO presence in Europe. For instance, Canadian troops are the key element for the battle group of NATO in Latvia. Right now, industry and military affairs are crucial for both sides.
The additional European loans may also help to address some of the shortcomings which Canada has been criticized for.
The Canadian spending has been much less than the agreed 2% within NATO. One of the important drivers is the relatively low levels of Canadian defense spending. And so if there is money available around in Europe, it might be very appealing for Canada to try to tap into that.
According to the Canadian government, it will seek to join the Rearm Europe plan as soon as July 1st. For TVP World, Zuzanna Jurek.
Poland's nuclear program is gaining momentum. Just this week, 6 Polish companies were selected to participate in the construction of the country's first nuclear power plant, which is supposed to go online by 2036. Meanwhile, the government has already begun its preparation for the building of a second one. Jan Kennedy brings us the details.
What is now just a patch of sand in the middle of a forest will in a decade be home to Poland's first nuclear power plant, and nearly 1/3 of the project's dedicated budget will be invested directly in Poland.
As the Polish state, we are set to spend over 14 billion euro on the construction of a nuclear power plant. We have adopted the principle that this entire amount must go to Polish companies involved in the construction.
So far, the government, in partnership with contractor Westinghouse Bechtel, has selected 6 Polish companies to manufacture components for the plant's AP1000 reactors, a move which, in addition to supplementing the economy, will provide contractors with invaluable experience.
Stepping into the nuclear business is like getting the highest grade when it comes to the technical standards, the safety standards in the electricity sector. So anyone that is able to take part in nuclear project is getting a stamp that he is providing the highest possible standards and is, of course, earning a big amount of money because of the things that he's doing.
And with nuclear energy being one of the government's key strategic pillars, more domestic companies are expected to join the effort.
This project has very sound political support, which may bring much more certainty to various Polish companies, for example, who may consider whether they want to join this project. And I think it's important that they have the certainty that this project will go on according to schedule and will actually happen so that they can plan the participation in this process.
Poland is working to reduce its dependence on coal, which last year dropped below 60% of the energy mix, with the development of renewables, including wind and solar, accelerating. Still, officials say more nuclear capacity will be crucial for ensuring long-term energy security.
According to the current energy policy, we should construct between 6 and 9 gigawatts of nuclear. The first is a bit less than 4, so there is still a large gap in nuclear.
That's why the government wants to build a second nuclear power plant. But should it be constructed by the same company?
From the point of view of the economics of scale, it is wise to invest in one technology in multiple locations, multiple reactors, because you get a price discount and a quicker development when it comes to one reactor after the another.
This time, the government says the contractor will be chosen through a competitive bidding process. France, however, appears to be the favourite after both countries signed a treaty aimed at strengthening cooperation in several areas, including nuclear energy. Time will tell how this partnership unfolds. For TVP World, Jan Kennedy.
The American Court of International Trade has ruled that President Trump's tariffs imposed on imports were unlawful and should therefore be lifted. But Washington has already decided to appeal this decision. How is this turmoil affecting the global economy and how will European countries react? Well, to discuss the issue, we're joined by Tomasz Włostowski, an EU-US trade and regulatory affairs lawyer, as well as managing partner at EU Strategies. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, first of all, great uncertainty looms over global markets after the US Trade Court decided to rule against Trump's tariffs. But what future awaits tariffs?
Well, I mean, definitely the Trump administration will appeal. That's number one. So this thing's going to drag on for another months. So this is
months.
Well, months, because this court decision is appealed. The Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit will rule in a couple of weeks or months, and then most likely, if the Trump administration loses, it's going to the Supreme Court. I mean, this is a very important case, and the issue of whether the president has the authority to use tariffs as broadly as President Trump is doing, that is going to end up in the Supreme Court sooner or later. So if it's not this case, some other case is going to end up before the Supreme Court. So number one, we're going to have a lot of court procedures in this particular case, but I think what's more important also is to understand that this court case, that this judgment doesn't really preclude President Trump from imposing tariffs. What it does, it says that this statutory authority that he used it too broadly, and he cannot do it under this particular statutory authority, which is the International Emergency Economics Powers Act. It doesn't mean that President Trump cannot impose tariffs. It doesn't mean he cannot do it under some other statutory authorities, and he has plenty of them. So he has other ways of imposing tariffs if he really wants to. He cannot just do it in such a broad and all-encompassing way.
Right, so silly question now that tariffs still in place because Donald Trump, as you say, is entitled to impose them?
Well, the status of these tariffs isn't exactly precise because the court gave the administration 10 days to figure out what to do about them. Almost certainly the Trump administration will ask the Court of Appeals to suspend the judgment pending litigation. So basically, this judgment most likely will not be enforced during the litigation. We don't know that, but most likely they will ask for suspension and the court will probably grant it, to be honest. So for a while it will not be clear. That's number one. Number two, the Trump administration will have to decide, well, are they likely to win the case with the Supreme Court or not? And if not, then what other tools he has? And as I've mentioned, he has a lot of other statutory authorities to use. It doesn't preclude him from imposing tariffs, but it requires more, I would say, procedure, more fact-finding, and a more, I would say, systematic and scientific method about going about. Because one of the primary problems we had with the IEEPA, which is the statute he used, is that basically President Trump decided one day, I want tariffs, and he imposed the tariffs. The other statutes require the president to actually conduct investigations, to do some fact-finding, to actually present in a very detailed and methodological way what is he actually trying to accomplish, what are the objectives, what are the trade patterns, what are the facts. And this is something that's been so desperately missing, I think, until now.
Right, so you've described the two camps of this conflict. Now, to paraphrase Donald Trump, who has better cards?
Well, I think President Trump has very strong cards because, as I mentioned, he has other statutory authorities. So he can it's just like a whack-a-mole, so he can just keep imposing the tariffs if he wants to. I think the case definitely strengthens the hands of the international trade partners, because they can quite clearly now see that even that when they negotiate with President Trump, that his statutory authority is not that clear. So they might just basically decide to wait out and let the process play out in the United States. I think this judgment will definitely lead to a much, I think, tougher negotiation for the American administration, because now all the other trade counterparts see that the president authorities' hand is weakened.
Right. As you advise businesses both on this and the other side of the Atlantic, what would be your advice at this particular moment?
Well, I would say, look, this is good news. Things are going in the right direction. There's going to still be a lot of commotion in the months to come. I think in general the tariffs, and this is not only because of this case, but in general, I think if we observe what President Trump's been doing, I think he's ready to put the tariff conflict to an end sooner or later. He's got other things on his agenda. I think the outburst against the European Union over the weekend was also an attempt to get the deal done and really move on to other topics. He's got a lot of other things on his agenda. And I think he's realizing that the trade war is much more complicated than he thought initially. So he's ready to put it to rest and move on to other things.
Now, as you have already mentioned, the EU, what stance should the Commission take, and would it be wise for Europe to meddle in, well, as a matter of fact, in America's domestic affairs?
Well, in this particular case, no. And I think so it's an interesting moment in time, because I think the European Commission until last weekend was quite strict. And I think this is what led to President Trump's outburst over the weekend. But what that triggered is that the member states began, I think, losing faith in the process. And the reason why Ursula von der Leyen all of a sudden changed her attitude and said, yes, let's negotiate, is because she received a number of phone calls from the capitals who were a bit afraid of where this is going. So they asked the Commission to basically, I would say, to bend the knee, kiss the ring, just call President Trump, give him what he wants, and let's move on. We have other things on the agenda. Now, this court case, again, it basically, I think it tells us that the Commission was quite correct in playing tough with the Americans, because President Trump is very good in portraying himself all-powerful, but as we see in this case, he's really not.
That's the beauty of democracy. Now, talking about another democratic country, Poland. How is this current uncertainty, which I have mentioned in the very beginning, affecting Polish affairs?
Well, look, I think Poland is probably one of the countries that really wanted this thing, the Commission to call President Trump and get this problem resolved. We have, I think, much bigger topics on the agenda than trade, to be honest. And I think this is particularly for our part of Europe. We have the NATO summit coming up. I think there is a general will in Central Europe to keep the United States administration involved in Europe, to keep them involved in defense, to keep them involved on Ukrainian side in the Russia-Ukraine conflict, get them involved militarily and so on in this part of Europe, provide the weapons and so on. So I think the trade conflict is actually something that, at least in our part of Europe, the countries are just willing to forego. Just give Trump what he wants. Let's keep him engaged. Let's keep the positive vibe between us and them, and let's worry about the trade implications later. So this particular court case, I don't think it's going to really change the attitude in our part of Europe.
Yes, but as you said, that would be my last question. It will be a lengthy process, right? This legal battle. Now, can Europeans, well, the rest of the world, as a matter of fact, just wait it out?
I think, well, that's what I would advise them to do, essentially. So basically, get engaged in the negotiations with the Trump administration. But we're not under a hurry, because the time is on our side, as this court case shows. There will be more cases. This is not the first one. America is a very litigious society, so there's going to be cases all over the place. So I think time is on our side. Also because I think President Trump is tired of the trade wars, and even though he's the one that started them, I think he needs the wins. Once he has something he can portray as a win, he's ready to move on.
Tomasz Włostowski, an EU-US trade and regulatory affairs lawyer, as well as managing partner at EU Strategies, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much. And thank you for watching and stay with us for much more news and features here on TVP World.